to suit their needs any better than the basic one. And then for some people, if they're really after, I guess, an example of...
Oh, who's this?
Hello, George. And so you're here in the fields. Hello, George.
Batman.
Say hello to the camera. Okay. Off you go, George. So in some people's cases, if they're after optical performance as their main criteria, you wouldn't upgrade them, and you would sort of, but they wanted moderately thinner and they've got a moderate script, you wouldn't necessarily try and upgrade them from a 1.6 to 1.67, because optically, you know, night driving, things like that, they might start to notice a little bit of colour fringing with a 1.67, whereas the 1.6 is a more stable material, it's thin and light, and it's going to give them superior optical performance. It's a lot to take in one go, but does that sort of see? So when you can see the, hence you can see why I've tried to make the descriptions in the price guide, the lens price guide.
Looking at that in the past few days while I've been doing dispensers with the other girls, it's making more sense because it's got the description next to it as well.
If I put the technical data going, specific gravity, da 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 da, make no sense to you, but make no sense to our clients either. But really, when we're talking about those sorts of things, that's what it relates to. It relates to the underlying properties of the material, and that certain properties they might be better by being, 159. Very impact resistant. Sounds good. Light and thin. Sounds good. Optically pretty cruddy as soon as your prescription steps out of very low power. Not such a good fit. Tends to means the coatings are going to break down. Tends to mean that it's not going to scratch more resistance. It's going to mean if you happen to use acetone and you get a bit on the glasses, it's actually going to take off the surface and smearing, and you won't actually be able to see out of it at all. Not such a good property. So you see there's an interplay between the properties. They might be good on one area and others. And so what we've tried to do, and with the lens map, there are other lenses available out there. What I've tried to actually create is where we get a good range of really, really great materials that will cover most people's needs well, but also materials and properties that also cover price points, so that they're, that again, we could say sell to everyone. And I know some practices that just decide they like 1.6 and they make everyone 1.6, 1.6 index, and that's okay.
Not great.
But not great, because for some people that means that they're putting them into a higher price point budget when they don't need to, and particularly for some people that may not be an issue. They might be just happy that it just feels light. I mean, some people are just happy to have the lightest glasses they can have on, and if that's what they want,
that's what you give them.
That's what you give them. Or that's what they need, that's what you give them. Some people may want something, and sometimes you have to guide them towards what they actually will benefit most from.
You don't tell them, can't you?
Yeah, but you can guide them and say, yes, that's great, we can supply that. The issue we will have is potentially this, this and this, so I would recommend that we also consider this, this and this. That's what you need to be doing. So you can see the lens mat has been designed very much specifically to be user-friendly for you guys as far as the language that it uses, and but it also has been designed to make sure that clients are getting great value for money, and that we're also covering a great range of needs, and we've got the best products in there that will suit all the range of clients that we get. Okay? So there's Abbey numbers. We talked about specific gravity. Again, we go back to our prop. It all comes back down to water. Okay, so a lot of those things relate to water. Abbey numbers. I'm not sure actually what Abbey number's reference point is, but again, it's a number that's been used. It's about the clarity and how much it spreads light. So they're the main ones we tend to talk about. Abbey number, refractive index, specific gravity. The next ones that we probably should have a little look at is actually coming to do with things like, and Brett from Hoya will also do some training on this, is actually relating to this something when we talk about some other features there. If you want to read out once again the features of, say, we might pick 1.5 this time.
1.5?
Yeah.
Good optical properties, standard optical material, durable and reliable.
Okay. So it's durable. So durable talks about, I suppose, is another way of saying about scratch resistance to some degree, isn't it? So it's durable. So let's move into something called scratch resistance. And there's actually something called a hardness scale. And it's actually, I think, come from geology. Sounds a bit funny, but you know how they rate rocks. How hard is a rock? Well, it's a 0 to 10 scale, with I think 0 being butter.
You'd
So,
think, wouldn't you?
how easy is it to scratch a stick of butter? Right through to 10 being basically diamond. How easy is it to scratch a diamond? Diamonds are scratchable, but it's again, it's a reference scale and it's been used a long time, and I think it actually comes from rock hardness scale and all the rest of it. And traditionally, in the middle there, the scratch resistance of plastic lenses uncoated is about a 4, I think. And then with the first generation of hard coats, it moved to about 5, and then it moved to about 6. And now our hardness scales are around about, hovering between about 7 to 8. Okay, so the most scratch resistant ones are about 7.6. So you can sort of see scratch resistance is something that we've not licked, but we've certainly moved to more scratch resistance. And so they'll often, if they talk about, if you actually look at the product guide, sometimes I'll talk about the scratch resistance scale, and you'll see 6.6, 6.7 or 7.2. All that is out of 10, and it relates to that geology hardness scale type thing. And it's one to get your harder. It's harder around. Every time that the manufacturers release some new improved scratch resistant stuff, they're really always after scratches, because obviously it's a chief client complaint that their glasses scratch. Some people like their glasses to last forever, and some people can make them, if they look after them, last a very long time, especially with the good coatings, a very long time. And with the premium coatings that we tend to use, and all of ours are, so it's one thing to have scratch resistance, but is the scratch resistant coating you've got a 5.5 scratch resistance coating, or is it a 6.5 scratch resistant coating? It may not sound like a lot of difference on the scale, but in terms of day-to-day use makes a big difference. One means you get away with a bit of rubbing the lens with a cloth that had a little bit of grime and a little bit of tracing, and you didn't get much scratching. And the other one means that even with that over time, you get quite a lot of scratching on the lens, fine little scratches. Neither of them are going to save it when something very sharp and you walk into the edge of a post that's got a bit of metal sticking out and it scratches the lens, or you drop them on the concrete. If it hits the lens, you're probably going to get a touch of scratching, but is it a touch, or is it a moderate amount? And so it does make a difference to the wear and tear. But scratch resistance is more about wear and tear. So not saying that people can drop them, or if they rub them across a hard surface that we're actually going to stop the lens from scratching. That's sort of beyond our capabilities to do that at the moment. But what it does sort of say is, with the odd drop, or the odd little rub, or the rubbing on a shirt rather than a cloth, if they're looking after them moderately well rather than really well, will they get away with that versus not get away with that? And obviously some of that will depend on them. If they're rubbing it on a shirt or a cloth occasionally, and they tend to be an office worker, they're probably going to get away with it pretty well with a moderately scratch-resistant lens. But in a non-scratch resistant lens, we are going to, sorry, they're not going to get away with it as well. But if they work outside and they've got a lot of dust, and one that's not the most scratch resistant, even the most scratch resistant, they'll get away with it. The lens may mean that it starts to have moderate scratching that starts to be a problem for their seeing after 18 months to 2 years, rather than after 9 to 12 months. So it's not that it won't stop it, it'll just keep the scratching level much milder for longer. And so that means that, by the time they're going, oh yes, but my focus has changed anyway after a couple of years, so I was due to replace them and they're a bit scratched. So you're really after the scratch resistant being that if they treat them moderately well, that they will survive the prescription lifetime. So typically 2.5 years that they'll get through that period of time without much, even if they've worked in sort of moderately challenging conditions. If they're working in extremely abrasive, challenging conditions, none of the lenses on the market will stand up very well. So scratch resistance, and that's something that obviously the manufacturers work really hard on, particularly with their anti-reflection coatings, because that was one of the problems with the anti-reflection coatings when they first came out 10 or 15 years, 20 years ago. Been out for at least 20 years now, but the first ones were quite good at reducing the reflections off the lens, but tended to be harder to clean. They tended to attract dust a little bit because they were a bit harder to clean if people didn't look after them well. They tended to scratch more easily. Their hardness scales were probably more like the 5.5, where the new ones are up to sort of 7 inches, or into the 7s on the scratch resistant scale. It's it's an improved, they've got a lot better at that, and they've tried to improve and add certain coatings to them. So when you start talking about anti-reflection coating, you'll hear them talk about hydrophobic, water repellent, smudge resistant, anti-static. So some of that, I suppose static is the typical one. You jump on the trampoline and your hair stands on it and everything sticks to things. So how well do they accept not taking on a little bit of charge, so that basically dust particles then want to go, and you can sort of see the ones that have had a little bit of charge on them, they can go away in the case, and you pick them up out of the case, and then some of the older AR coatings, and you can actually see they've got fine little dust particles stuck to them. Not dust, there's fine little fabric particles from the inside of the case or cloth that have actually sucked onto the lens. And as soon as you wipe them off, they're gone, but it sort of shows how easily that they attract dust. So the new coatings are trying to be water repellent, so that again, if you get droplets on them, they don't just stay on the lens, they tend to want to bead and run off. Okay, so how water repellent, how smudge resistant.
Need that on car windscreens, don't we?
Yeah. And so basically with all those features, the more that they have that, then they tend to mean that they'll tend to stay cleaner for longer before you actually have to wipe and clean them. The only problem with anti-reflection coating is though, when you're saying that yes, they're smudge and clean resistant, when they are very clean, an anti-reflection coating will give improved clarity of vision, and that's because the light, rather than having a lot of things bounce off the surface like a mirror, if you like, nearly all the light goes straight through. So you get about 99% transmission or greater, whereas with a typical lens that's uncoated, the transmission, depending on the angle of light and stuff, drops down to about 93-94%. So they're losing about 7% of the light coming through, which obviously for someone actually reduces the clarity of vision. Plus then they're getting reflections off the back of the lens into their eye that are distracting. So it can drop their vision by, or it can add distraction to their vision by at least 10 to 15% sometimes in certain conditions. So an anti-reflection coating is an excellent property, not only for cosmetic appearance, but also functional improvement in their vision. However, because the lens is so clean, what people often notice is, if you check the cleanness of a non-coated lens, a hard-coated but not anti-reflection coating lens, it'll actually be quite dirty, but people won't perceive it as dirty because they're used to having a 10 or 15% distraction in the vision. You put on an anti-reflection coating where you've got most of the lens really clean and then you've got a big smudgy fingerprint in one spot, people will go, oh, they might have a smudgy fingerprint on a hard coating, but they don't tend to notice it as much as they do on an anti-reflection coating because the rest of the lens is so good, that spot is really, really distracting and annoying. So it's often a good way to explain to people is, because the lenses are super clear and good to look through, if you do get a smudge on them, you'll find it's more annoying. And that's because the rest of the lens is so good compared to your usual type of lens. So don't be put off by that, because it does mean that the rest of the time you're actually getting improved vision. You're noticing the distraction. That doesn't mean they're getting dirty more often. It's just your other ones were so distracted you didn't notice the dirt as much amongst all the reflections.
Interview over at